Alien girl hid behind the human's beacon tower. Her first true word became the unexpected twist. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Ethan Hunter stood at the base of the beacon tower, the cold wind biting at his face as he adjusted his jacket against the chill of the evening. The tower loomed above him, casting its light over the dark landscape, a silent sentinel against the vast, empty expanse of the alien world. He had been assigned to this remote post as part of a humanitarian mission, far from the bustling cities, in a place where few ventured. It was a lonely job, but someone had to do it. Ethan looked out over the alien terrain, his mind wandering to thoughts of home, and then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. He froze, instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side, though he quickly hesitated. It was a small figure, barely visible against the dark rocks and snow. Ethan squinted, trying to make sense of the silhouette, but it seemed to vanish as quickly as it had appeared. His heart raced. Was it a local alien? One of the inhabitants of the planet? Or something else entirely? He slowly approached the spot, scanning the area carefully. As he neared the base of the tower, his foot caught on a loose rock, sending a small, echoing clatter into the stillness. He cursed under his breath, pausing to regain his balance. That's when he saw her. A young alien girl, barely more than a child, crouching behind the tower, her large, alien eyes wide with fear. Her skin was a striking shade of blue, and her hair shimmered like silver, catching the faint light from the beacon. She looked at him, her gaze filled with a mix of curiosity and terror. Ethan took a cautious step forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said though. He wasn't sure if she understood him. The girl flinched but didn't run. Instead, she slowly rose to her feet, her body tense as though preparing to flee. Ethan remained still, not wanting to startle her further. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than just a lost alien child. She was hiding for a reason. As the silence stretched between them, something unexpected happened. The girl, her eyes still locked on him, parted her lips. For a moment, Ethan thought he might have imagined it. But then it came again, soft but clear, her first true word. "Help," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. It was simple, but the weight of it hit him like a punch to the gut. The girl wasn't just lost, she needed something. Ethan stepped closer, kneeling down to her level, his voice reassuring as he spoke again. "I'll help you," he said. The girl seemed to relax just a little, though she still watched him warily. Ethan felt a surge of determination. There was no way he was going to leave her here, alone, in a place like this. As he offered his hand to her, she hesitated for a moment before slowly reaching out, her small hand brushing against his. The moment their fingers touched, Ethan felt a strange connection, something beyond the obvious need for survival. It was as if, in that simple touch, she was acknowledging the bond they now shared. Two strangers, one human, one alien, caught in the middle of an unknown world, with only each other to rely on. As Ethan and the alien girl, whom he now thought of as Lyra, stood in the shadow of the beacon tower, the wind picked up, sending gusts of cold air swirling around them. Ethan glanced down at the small, trembling figure beside him, her alien eyes reflecting the soft glow of the beacon's light. He could feel her uncertainty, but also something else, a flicker of trust, however small. His mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do next. He had no idea how she had ended up here, or why she was hiding, but one thing was clear, she needed help. "All right, Lyra," he said softly, keeping his tone calm and steady. "Let's get you somewhere safe. It's too cold out here." She hesitated, her eyes darting around as if she expected something, or someone, to emerge from the darkness. But when he stepped forward, she didn't move away. Instead, she slowly followed him, her small steps almost silent on the frozen ground. They made their way to a small, abandoned structure nearby, a place Ethan used to retreat to for some peace and quiet during his solitary shifts. It wasn't much, but it would provide them with shelter for the night. The wind howled as they entered, and Ethan immediately began to work on lighting a small fire. He had supplies in the corner, basic rations, and a portable heater. As he set everything up, he noticed Lyra standing in the corner, her arms crossed over her chest, looking out of place. "You're safe here," he said, trying to ease her tension. "No one's going to hurt you. Not while I'm around." Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied him with an intensity that made Ethan shift uncomfortably. Her large, vibrant eyes seemed to see right through him, as if she were trying to understand him in a way he couldn't quite comprehend. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Ethan glanced up, surprised by the question. It was a simple one, but it made him pause. Why had he helped her? Was it out of some sense of duty? Compassion? Or was it something deeper, something that made him act without thinking? "Because no one should be left alone out here," he said after a moment, his voice quiet. "Especially not someone like you." Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time since they'd met, she took a tentative step forward. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sure I have a choice." Ethan nodded, his heart aching at her vulnerability. "You don't have to trust me right away, but you can stay here as long as you need to. I won't let anything happen to you." Lyra didn't reply, but her eyes seemed to soften, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. Ethan went to the small stove and began heating up some water for tea. As the steam rose, he noticed Lyra watching him, her eyes still filled with uncertainty, but also something else, something that could only be described as hope. He handed her a cup of tea, and as she took it from him, their hands brushed. It was a fleeting touch, but it left an impression on both of them. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice filled with both hope and fear. Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave her alone. "Now, we take it one step at a time," he said softly. "We figure this out together." The following days passed in a strange rhythm. Ethan and Lyra remained in the small shelter near the beacon tower, the isolated environment providing them a rare sense of safety. The harsh wind outside had not let up, but inside, they had warmth and quiet. Ethan spent most of his time working on repairs to the tower, ensuring it remained functional in case they needed to send out a signal for help. Lyra, though hesitant at first, slowly began to open up. She didn't speak much, but her presence was a constant reminder of the deep unknown that lay ahead for both of them. One evening, as the cold seeped into the walls, Ethan sat down next to the small fire they had kindled. The crackling flames illuminated the room, casting dancing shadows across the walls. He glanced over at Lyra, who was quietly observing the flames. Her large eyes reflected the warmth of the fire, but there was a certain distance in them, a sadness that Ethan couldn't quite place. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, his voice soft, respectful of her space. Lyra looked up at him, her gaze steady but unsure. It took a long moment before she finally spoke. "I don't know where to start," she admitted quietly, her voice carrying the weight of something deep and unresolved. "I don't know where I belong." Ethan nodded, his heart heavy with empathy. He knew what it was like to feel lost. He didn't know her full story, but he could tell that the girl before him wasn't just running from the weather or a random encounter. There was something much bigger she was fleeing from. "You're not alone here," he said gently, offering her a smile. "You've got a place here with me." Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood and moved toward the small window. The night sky outside was dark, but the distant stars were visible, twinkling in the vast expanse of space. "I didn't choose this life," she said softly, almost to herself. "None of us do, but we have to live it anyway." Ethan could hear the sorrow in her words, and it stirred something within him. He had no idea what she had gone through, but he could feel the weight of her words in his chest. "I know it's hard," he said, his voice low and sincere. "But sometimes, we can't change where we come from. What we can change is where we go from here. We don't have to go through it alone." Lyra turned toward him, her eyes searching his face, as if testing the sincerity of his offer. There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Lyra walked back to where he was sitting and sat beside him, a tentative but clear acceptance of his words. "Maybe you're right," she said after a pause. "Maybe we don't have to do this alone." For the first time since they'd met, Ethan felt the weight between them shift, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the following days, Lyra became more comfortable around him. She still kept much of her past to herself, but the silence between them wasn't as heavy. They began to work together to make the shelter more comfortable, and though they never spoke of it directly, there was an unspoken bond forming between them. Ethan knew he had made a promise to himself to keep her safe, and so far, he had kept it. But he also knew there was much more to Lyra than met the eye. Something about her presence seemed to pulse with a quiet intensity, and though she wasn't ready to share it yet, Ethan could feel that the time would come when she would. For now, though, they moved forward, two souls connected by fate, in a place where trust was fragile, but growing. As the days went by, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what had brought Lyra here, to this desolate place, and why she had chosen to hide. There was so much he didn't know about her world, her people, but he had a feeling that sooner or later, the truth would come out. And when it did, he would be there for her, as he had promised. Days blended into one another as Ethan and Lyra settled into their new routine. The harsh winds outside had not relented, but inside the shelter, they found a tentative peace. Ethan had managed to repair most of the tower's systems, and now his days were filled with the monotony of maintenance and the occasional check on their supplies. Lyra had grown more comfortable, though she still kept her distance at times. She spent hours studying the star-filled sky through the small window, her eyes tracing the constellations as if they held answers to questions only she understood. One evening, after the fire had burned low, Lyra turned to Ethan. "Do you ever wonder what lies beyond all of this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced up from the small tool he was cleaning, surprised by the question. He thought for a moment before responding. "I suppose I do. I've always been curious about what's out there. Space is vast, and there's so much we don't know." Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze distant as if she were searching for something in the stars. "I used to think I had all the answers," she continued, her voice heavy with a mix of sadness and reflection. "But now I feel like I'm just a piece in a game I don't understand." Ethan put down the tool and turned to face her. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said gently. "Sometimes, the journey is about figuring things out as you go, and you're not alone in it. You've got me." Lyra's eyes flickered with uncertainty. She had never fully trusted anyone before, least of all a human, but there was something about Ethan's presence that made her feel safer. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice clear. "But I want to. I just don't know how." Ethan smiled softly, his heart aching at her words. He understood the struggle. Trust wasn't easy, not after everything she must have been through. "You don't have to rush it," he said. "We'll take things one day at a time." The fire crackled softly between them, the warmth of the flames offering comfort against the cold that raged outside. As the days passed, Ethan and Lyra began to find a rhythm. He would spend his days working on the tower, and Lyra, though still guarded, would help in small ways, sorting through supplies, making tea, and occasionally sharing stories from her home planet, though she was careful with the details. She had yet to reveal much about her past, but Ethan could tell there was more to her story than she let on. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lyra spoke again. "I miss my people," she said quietly. "I miss home." Ethan looked at her, sensing the weight of her words. "I can't imagine what it must be like," he said, his voice soft. "But you're here now, and I'm here. You're not alone, Lyra." She met his gaze, her expression softening just a little. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe it. The next few days were calm. The winds outside howled, but inside, there was peace. One morning, as Ethan went to check on the tower's power systems, he found Lyra sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. There was something different in the way she was looking at the world now, something more grounded. She didn't look as lost as she had before. Ethan watched her for a moment before speaking. "You're not alone, Lyra," he repeated, though this time, it was more of a promise than a reassurance. Lyra turned to him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Maybe not," she said quietly. And for the first time, Ethan truly believed that she was starting to believe it too. The days continued to pass by in a quiet, steady rhythm. Ethan and Lyra had settled into an unspoken routine, and though the outside world remained harsh and unforgiving, Their small shelter offered a surprising amount of comfort. The wind outside howled relentlessly, but inside, they had warmth, safety, and each other's company. Ethan had learned to read Lyra's subtle cues over time. Her silence often spoke volumes, and though she didn't open up about her past, he could see the walls she had built around herself slowly starting to crack. He could see that she was starting to trust him, even if just a little. One evening, as Ethan worked on some repairs to the communication systems, Lyra sat by the fire, her eyes lost in thought. He looked up for a moment and noticed her stillness. "Lyra," he said gently, his voice soft enough not to startle her. "Is everything okay?" She blinked, as though coming out of a trance, and looked at him. For a brief moment, her face held an expression he couldn't quite decipher, but then she smiled, a quiet, almost imperceptible thing. "Just thinking," she said, her voice low. Ethan nodded, though he still felt the weight of the silence between them. It wasn't often that she spoke freely, and he knew better than to press her. Instead, he turned his attention back to the task at hand, trying to focus on fixing the relay station. But his mind kept returning to her, to the mystery of her past that she had yet to share. What had happened to her? Why was she hiding? The question lingered, but he pushed it aside for the time being. A few days later, after they had spent a long day together repairing various systems, Ethan noticed something different in Lyra's demeanor. She was sitting by the window again, staring out at the vast expanse of the planet's surface. Ethan had grown accustomed to the quiet, but there was something in the air now, a subtle shift that he couldn't ignore. He set down his tools and walked over to her. "Lyra," he said softly. She turned to face him, and this time, there was something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. It was a kind of resolve, a quiet determination. "I think it's time I tell you," she said, her voice steady but laced with a tension he could feel in the air. Ethan didn't speak. He simply sat down next to her, giving her the space she needed. She took a deep breath before continuing. "I didn't just stumble here," she said, her words measured. "I was running away. From my own people." Ethan felt his heart tighten, his mind racing with questions. "Running away from what?" he asked gently, though he already knew this was a moment of truth, one she had been holding back for so long. Lyra paused, looking out the window once more before she spoke again. "I'm not just some lost wanderer," she said, her voice growing quieter, more vulnerable. "I come from a place where things are complicated. I didn't agree with what they were doing, so I left. But now they're looking for me, and I'm not sure what's going to happen when they find me." Ethan didn't know what to say at first. He had known that there was more to her story, but hearing her say it out loud, the weight of her words, made the reality of her situation sink in. "You don't have to face this alone," Ethan said, his voice firm, resolute. "Whatever happens, I'll help you. You're not going back, not if I can help it." Lyra looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe something deeper. For a long moment, she said nothing, but then, slowly, she nodded. "I believe you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words were simple, but to Ethan, they meant everything. They had reached a new understanding, a new level of trust. And for the first time since they had met, Ethan felt certain about one thing. He wasn't going to let her go. Together, they would face whatever came next. Lyra wasn't alone anymore, and neither was he. The days following their conversation felt different. There was a quiet understanding between Ethan and Lyra now, a bond that neither of them had expected, but both had come to rely on. The winds outside had settled somewhat, and the bleak landscape that stretched before them seemed less daunting. Ethan found himself spending more time looking out over the horizon, lost in thought, while Lyra grew more comfortable in their small shelter. She would occasionally glance at the stars, her expression thoughtful, as if each one held a secret she was still trying to uncover. One afternoon, as they worked together to gather supplies, Lyra finally spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "Do you think they'll come for me?" she asked, not looking at him, but at the ground beneath her feet. Ethan paused, considering her question. He hadn't wanted to admit it to her, but the truth was, he didn't know. He wasn't even sure who they were or how far their reach extended, but the fact that Lyra had left her people, and that they were now hunting her, was more than enough reason to be concerned. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with the uncertainty he felt. "But we'll be ready for whatever happens. We'll figure it out, together." Lyra looked up, Then, meeting his gaze, and for the first time in days, he saw a flicker of something more: hope. Together, she repeated softly. As the days passed, their routine continued. Ethan worked on the communication systems, trying to fix any issues that might arise, while Lyra spent her time in quieter moments, reading from the few books she had brought with her, or sometimes just sitting and staring out the window, her thoughts a million miles away. She had become more open with Ethan, slowly sharing more about her past, but still, there were gaps in her story, pieces of her life she had yet to fully explain. Ethan didn't press her for answers, but he couldn't help wondering about the world she came from, the people she had left behind. One evening, as the two of them sat together, Ethan glanced at the flickering fire and then at Lyra. "What was it like, where you're from?" he asked, his voice casual, but filled with genuine curiosity. Lyra didn't respond immediately, but after a long pause, she finally spoke. "It was beautiful," she said softly. "In its own way. But it wasn't home, not for me. The people there, they were driven by a need to control, to dominate. And I couldn't be a part of that." Ethan listened intently, his mind racing with questions, but he didn't interrupt her. "I thought I could change things, make them see reason," she continued, her voice distant. "But sometimes, you have to realize when it's time to walk away." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Ethan could feel the depth of her struggle. "I don't think I've ever truly belonged anywhere," she added quietly. Ethan sat back, absorbing her words, realizing just how much she had given up to be here. And though he couldn't understand it all, he knew one thing for certain. He would help her, no matter what. "You belong here, Lyra," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "You've got a place with me, and that's all that matters." She turned to him then, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. The sincerity in her voice made his chest tighten. Ethan had always thought of himself as a man of action, someone who fixed problems. But now, standing beside Lyra, he realized that sometimes the most important thing wasn't fixing what was broken. It was standing by someone who needed you. And for Lyra, that was exactly what he intended to do. Together, they had found something that neither of them had expected: trust. It wasn't a cure for everything they faced, but it was a start. And in a world that had seemed so uncertain, that small step forward felt like the only thing that mattered. The wind had quieted down, and the cold had settled into a calm, almost eerie stillness. Inside the shelter, time seemed to stretch, each moment spent in the company of Lyra offering Ethan a sense of peace he hadn't expected. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew stronger. Though Lyra remained silent about much of her past, there was a comfort in their shared routine. Ethan had found a kind of purpose here, not in fixing the technology or keeping the beacon tower operational, but in being there for Lyra. He had become her protector, a role he had never anticipated but had come to accept with all the seriousness it demanded. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the alien landscape, Lyra spoke again. This time, there was an unmistakable sense of resolve in her voice. "Ethan," she began, her tone serious, "I need to go. I can't hide forever." Ethan's heart sank at the words, though he had known this moment would come. She was right. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The world was vast, and the longer they remained in the shelter, the more likely it was that someone would find them. "You don't have to go alone," he said, his voice firm as he met her gaze. "I'll go with you, wherever you need to be." Lyra's eyes softened, but the uncertainty that lingered in her expression told Ethan everything he needed to know. She didn't want him to get involved any more than he already had. "It's not that simple," she replied quietly. "There are things I have to face, and I don't want you to be dragged into it." Ethan shook his head, stepping closer to her. "I'm already in it," he said softly, "and I won't let you face it alone." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I don't know what will happen," she said, almost to herself, "but I won't make you go back on your word." The quiet between them was heavy, but there was a sense of understanding in it. They had both come to realize that their fates were intertwined, and no matter how much Lyra wanted to keep him safe from the dangers she faced, Ethan was determined to stay by her side. The following days were filled with preparation. Ethan worked on the communications system, ensuring that if they needed to reach out for help, they could. Meanwhile, Lyra gathered what little she had left, items from her past, mementos that reminded her of the life she had left behind. Neither of them spoke much during this time. There was a quiet urgency to their actions, a sense that whatever was coming next, they had to be ready for it. As they packed the last of their supplies, Ethan turned to Lyra, his expression resolute. "Where do we go now?" he asked. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then spoke with a calm certainty that had not been there before. "There's a place," she said softly. "A place where I can disappear, for a while, at least. It's not much, but it's enough." Ethan didn't ask questions. He trusted her, and he knew this was the only choice they had. Together, they set off into the unknown, the journey ahead uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together. The stars above seemed to watch over them as they walked into the night, the promise of tomorrow waiting for them, whatever it may bring. The journey was quieter than Ethan had expected. The landscape stretched before them, barren and desolate, with only the occasional gust of wind breaking the silence. Ethan and Lyra moved in the shadows of the beacon tower, their footsteps light but purposeful. Though they had decided to leave the safety of the shelter, neither of them spoke much. The weight of their decision hung heavy between them, and the uncertainty of what awaited them made each step feel like a step further into the unknown. As they traveled, Ethan found himself glancing over at Lyra more often than he meant to. She was walking with a purpose, her eyes set straight ahead, but there was something in her that was different, more vulnerable, more distant. It wasn't just the weight of the journey, it was the weight of her past catching up with her. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. Below them, a hidden settlement nestled in the rocky terrain, its existence concealed by the natural landscape. "Is that the place?" Ethan asked, his voice low, as he looked down at the hidden refuge. Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not much, but it's enough for now." They descended toward the settlement, their footsteps crunching softly against the gravel as they approached the entrance. The closer they got, the more Ethan could see that it wasn't a bustling town, but a quiet, isolated place, small houses built into the cliffs, with few signs of life. It felt more like a hideaway than a home. As they entered the settlement, Lyra led him to a small building tucked at the edge of the settlement. It looked as though it hadn't been used in a while, with dust covering the windows and the door slightly ajar. "This is where I've been staying," Lyra explained, pushing the door open. The inside was modest, with minimal furnishings. A few blankets lay haphazardly on the floor, and there were shelves filled with strange, unfamiliar objects, some from her home planet, others that seemed more like random finds. Ethan stepped inside, feeling the cool air that hung in the space. The quiet was almost suffocating, but there was a certain peace to it, a sense that time didn't move here in the same way it did outside. Lyra set down her bag and walked over to the window, gazing out at the desolate landscape. Ethan watched her for a moment, unsure of what to say. "Do you think this will be enough?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Lyra didn't immediately respond. Instead, she continued to stare out at the horizon, as if searching for something in the vast emptiness. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. "But it's all I have for now." Ethan approached her, standing beside her at the window. "You're not alone anymore, Lyra," he said, his voice steady. "You've got me, and I'm not going anywhere." She turned to look at him then, her eyes searching his face for something. For reassurance, perhaps, or maybe for a glimpse of hope. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. A small, hesitant smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Thank you," she whispered. The words were simple, but they held more weight than anything else she had said. Ethan felt his chest tighten at her gratitude, but also at the realization that their journey wasn't over. This was just the beginning. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many things they didn't know. But as they stood there, side by side, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days in the small, hidden settlement passed quietly, and though there was an unspoken tension between Ethan and Lyra, it was a different kind of tension now. It wasn't the uncertainty of being chased or the fear of the unknown. It was the quiet anticipation of what might come next. They had found a temporary peace in this place, but even here, with the desolate landscape stretching out beyond their small building, there was always the feeling that something larger was waiting for them. Lyra had settled into a rhythm, spending her days quietly exploring the area around the settlement, occasionally returning with new items, some from her home world, others from the land they now shared. Ethan kept busy with repairs and monitoring the communications system, though there was little to report. Still, he felt a deep sense of unease. Despite the safety they had found, it was clear that their pasts had not been left behind. Ethan knew Lyra wasn't fully at ease here, even if she hadn't said it outright. One evening, as the fading light of day painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Lyra stood by the window, staring out at the barren valley. Ethan stood a few paces behind her, his mind racing with thoughts he didn't know how to voice. Finally, he broke the silence. "You're thinking about leaving again, aren't you?" Lyra didn't turn around at first, but after a long pause, she nodded slightly. "I can't stay here forever," she said softly. "This is just a temporary refuge. They'll find me eventually. I need to face what's coming." Ethan stepped closer, his heart tightening at the thought of her leaving again. He didn't want to lose her, not after everything they had gone through. "You don't have to do this alone, Lyra," he said, his voice steady. "You have me. I'm not going anywhere." She turned then, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I know you're here for me, Ethan," she said quietly. "But I don't know if I can keep dragging you into my fight. You deserve a life where you're not hiding, where you're not running." Ethan's heart ached at her words, but he knew he had to make her see that he wasn't going anywhere. "I don't want a life without you," he said simply. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Lyra's eyes softened, but there was still hesitation there. She had been through too much, and the fear of dragging Ethan into her world of uncertainty was real. But as the silence lingered, she knew he was right. Together, they could face anything. That night, after their quiet conversation, they sat together by the small fire they had built. The warmth of the flames flickered in the dimly lit room, and for the first time in days, Lyra allowed herself to relax, even if just for a moment. Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders ease, but he also saw something else, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Maybe it was the fire, or maybe it was the simple act of being together in this small, quiet place, but something had shifted between them. The weight of their pasts was still heavy, but it wasn't as suffocating as before. Lyra looked at Ethan, her voice barely a whisper. "You're right. I can't do this alone. I'll stay. For now." Ethan smiled, a small but genuine smile. "We'll figure it out. One step at a time." The quiet of the settlement wrapped around them as they sat together in the flickering light. Ethan knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, he felt sure of one thing. No matter what came next, they would face it together. And that thought was enough to carry them forward into the uncertain future.